The title of this talk, and it's too long for one session, but it's called The Destiny of God, but it's a self-made destiny. God had no beginning, but he's always lived in the eternal mode, which has no beginning and no end. And I just thought of something I haven't talked about all week. It just came to my mind. And don't believe me, I'm not going to be able to answer right now. But he said, the best acts have no beginning. The best acts, ACTS, have no beginning, which means that they are done in the eternal mode of living in the divine will. Because when you enter into the divine will with his gift, like if you were to say, I love you, God, that means that you loved him as long as he had been God and as long as he will be God, which is always and forever. Prefatory remarks. God is eternal, without beginning, and a relationship of three divine persons who have no need of anything. Yet there was something special that they very, very much wanted. What they wanted so very, very much was mankind, male and female, with their souls united and living with them in their own same will, doing with them what they do. As most intimate companions, loving them with their own divine will, sharing one divine life together in perfect happiness and harmony. They love this mankind so much that was in their eternal mind before we actually came out of eternity and into time. They loved this mankind so much that they decided that one of them would even take upon himself the very same nature as man and become like man while remaining God. All mankind and all that they would give to mankind and all that they would receive from man in return became their preoccupation and their constant thought of their divine mind. It formed their destiny. Their destiny would be the joy and the glory of seeing man formed and finished outside of themselves in the marvelous universe that they would create just for him. So God, from always, in all eternity, but there are different points you might say in eternity, I don't know how to explain that. But in the beginning of God, and in the beginning that St. John the Evangelist had to use, in the beginning, even though there was no real beginning, in the beginning, they had this longing, this supreme longing to share with other beings, and they were going to be human beings, their very life, their companionship, and their divine will, and so forth and so on, and live one life together, doing the same things together. So if God, like creates the universe, he wanted man to be involved in that. If God makes the stars shine, he wants us to be making the stars shine. If the birds fly and the fish swim, God's making it happen, but he wants us to be making it happen with him. Now this is advanced. This is not something you normally do, but it's like Eamon said, he has a premonition that I won't be back. So I'm going to share one of my latest talks. The following texts are presented. I'm going to have some texts that are excerpted from Louisa's writings. The following texts are presented to aid the understanding of the Creator's purpose for human existence. the wondrous original state of man and the restoration of that happy original state after so many centuries of death, sorrow, disease, sin, and damnation that resulted from the original sin of Adam's disobedience and withdrawal from the original state of living in the divine will. He withdrew from a will that is a single, eternal, ever new act. It's a single act that goes on forever, like the sun in the sky. Got to put it there. It does one single thing. It puts out photons of light and heat. As long as it's the sun in the sky, that's what it does. One single act. But the effects of that one single act are thousands and thousands and millions of effects of that act of the sun. Same with God's single eternal act of His will. All the things that exist and will exist all come from that single act of God. The single prime act of God contains all that is good, past, present, and future. The single prime act contains the well springs of all other acts and their effects that come from it, ad extra, which means outside the Trinity, into the realm of time, outside the inner workings of the Trinity, between the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. All right. About the effects of the destiny of God in man and man's destiny in God. When we do acts in the divine will on earth, it has a great effect in heaven. It affects the angels and saints in heaven. And they look forward to the marvels and wonders and joys that they're going to get when we do an act on earth in the divine will. They're very much attentive, looking for who's going to do another act in the divine will on earth. But today, the blessed are full of happiness, of new and unspeakable joys, which the pilgrim soul, that's us on earth, pilgrim soul on earth, brings to each blessed in heaven, since this soul on earth is not in their enjoying mode of heaven, but the soul on earth is in the suffering and conquering mode with their free will while still on earth. Okay, while we're on earth, we're in the conquering mode, particularly right now, those of us who are laying the foundation for the future. For those who are coming in the future, we're in a conquering mode because we're overcoming the world, the devil, and the flesh. And so when we stay in that conquering mode and we do our acts in the divine will, those acts done in the conquering mode have certain aspects about them that are not available in heaven, in the enjoying mode. So the saints in heaven who are in enjoying mode, and many of them never heard about the divine will until they died and were in purgatory and about to go to heaven, and then they have to be given the gift of the divine will to get into heaven, because no one's allowed in there without it. So most of the souls in heaven right now never even heard about the divine will waiting on us while they were on earth. But they are in the enjoying mode, because that's part of what heaven's all about. To be in the enjoying mode of the divine will. We enjoy it too here, but we're in the conquering mode, particularly now. Merely by her breathing and her heartbeat and her emotions in the fullness of joy, the soul who lives in the divine will on earth brings ever new and unspeakable joys, I think, or I said that, to the inhabitants of heaven, because it is the soul's free will that forms the conquering act and gives to Jesus this new conquering flavor. Then Jesus said to Louisa, "My daughter, the love for the one who lives in our will, that is the Trinity, the love of the Trinity is so great for the one who lives in the divine will, as she breathes, she gives us the Trinity, the Holy Trinity, as a gift, all that we have done." That's why I said you might want to call it sure. The creation, the angels, the saints, and our own supreme being, our love and glory. Now what he's saying here is this. soul who lives in divine will on earth, because God has given us possession of the eternal will, which is present to all things, at all times, in all places, and all effects of that will. The soul also becomes present to all times, in all places, and all the effects of that will. Even though we may not know it intellectually, but by faith that we're required to know this. Okay, let's read it again. My daughter, the love for one who lives in our will is so great that as she breathes, just the act of breathing in the divine will, she gives us as a gift all that we have done, the Trinity has done. We give it back to him as a gift. In fact, I read where Adam wanted to repay God for creating the universe. He said, Jesus, with your own will, I want to give you as a present the whole universe as a return for having created it for me to live in. So Jesus wants to give us things, and then we give it back to him, and with the same will by which we receive it, by which he gives it, so that we cover some of these points. Here's another one. This act in the divine will, it runs to all, sanctifying, embellishing, giving happiness and honor to all. This is the most beautiful act that the creature can give to me. No one can equal this act, to give my will in order to have it returned and to give it back again. So it's exchange. God gives us his divine will, and we give it back to him. And he's delighted with that. And then he gives it back to us, and back and forth, and he doubles the effects in our souls each time he gives it back. As the creature enters our will, our soul, our joy is such that she gives us the field on which to repeat in her all that we have done in creation and redemption. In the creation of man, how much love God had in creating him. So, Adam, of course, if he had not sinned, we wouldn't have redemption. But we, in this time, by doing our acts in the divine will, we are giving back to God with his own will all that he did in creation and redemption. We've given it back to him as a gift, as a, and he gives it back to us again. Our divine being poured out love, and in creating Adam, our love was flowing, investing every fiber of his heart, every little tiny piece of his bones. Our love laid in his nerves. We made it also flow in his blood. We invested our love in his steps, motion, voice, and heartbeat, in each one of his love thoughts. My daughter, everything that has been done by our Supreme Being is all in action, even forever. It's always in action, never stops. And as we were just in the act of doing it for love of creatures, since all of our works were done for them, it seems that she, that is the soul, can't be without giving us new surprises, he says, of love in order to be able to say, I love you always. And we call her our joy and our perennial happiness, because there is no greater joy for us than the continuous love of the creature. That is, the continuous love, which is a divine love, that God, we're able to love God with, a divine love in the divine will. We give the creature by right all the goods of creation. In our will, the creature can say, all is mine, even God himself, as well as the divine will. Therefore, she feels the duty to glorify us and to love us in each thing and in every person. So all of these things get you so excited you want to do everything he says in here as much as you can. There was a line here where it seemed like you're separating the divine will from God as if it were a different entity. That's not true. The divine will is not a person per se, but the divine will is their common essence. It's an active essence that's always in act. And so the divine will is God, but it's not one of the three divine persons, of course. It's not a person, but it is the principle of action in God. It is the essence of God. My daughter, our love is so great that we do nothing other than give continuous gifts to the creature. The first gift was the whole creation. Then the creation of man came. How many gifts do we not give to him? Gifts of intelligence, in which we place the model, the image of the Most Holy Trinity. The eyes, the hearing, the speech, were all gifts that we gave to him. It would not be a work worthy of our wisdom to create with things without having the space in which to place them. In the same way, by creating the human will, we created the empty space inside the human will in which to put our great gift of our most holy will, which we gave to man. This space was to serve our operating will. We were to place in this space the most extensive heavens and the brightest suns, and not just one, but one for each time man would act in the divine will. Therefore, while creation had to serve man, this space of the human will was to serve his God, to form God's delights, to always be able to form his support, his throne, his divine chamber. I gave man this gift, forming this space within him, in order to have the place in which to communicate with him, to be one-on-one with him, in sweet company. I wanted to have my secret chamber. I wanted to tell him many things, but I wanted the environment in which to talk to him, and in which my love would reach the extent of giving itself completely to man, while he would completely abandon himself in God. So God formed a space inside the soul for his divine will to be placed in and to operate in us as it operates in God himself. And he wanted that perfect friendship, that perfect sonship and daughtership, that perfect unity of wills and life. Okay, as soon as the creature will possess our will, and all her acts, small and great, human and spiritual, will be animated by my will, so as to rise between heaven and earth, investing in braiding together the sky, the sun, the stars, and the whole creation. Then they will rise even higher, and will invest all the acts of the Queen of Heaven, identifying themselves with hers. Can't even begin to imagine what happens to this gift. These acts will have the power to invest the acts of our divinity, our joys and beatitudes, as well as those of the saints. Oh, what a joy, what a glory for us, finding in these acts, the sky, the sun, all the acts of the Queen of Heaven, the love with which she loved us, our own acts, our own joys, and our unceasing love. So God finds everything in an act that we do in the divine will. And he gave an illustration I read recently. We learn in the Blessed Sacrament, by the way, the Blessed Sacrament contains the divine will in it, of course. And so whenever you receive Holy Communion, you're receiving in that host, you're receiving the divine will in it. But it belongs to Jesus. Now, I'm talking about people who never heard about Louisa. The divine will belongs to Jesus, it doesn't belong to the soul. But he's there with the divine will, in the body, blood, soul, and divinity, including the divine will. So every time Jesus comes to us in communion, his divine will is there. And the divine will, if a person is disposed properly, the divine will generate grace. All grace comes from the divine will. And so the soul will get new graces by going to communion, if they're disposed properly. But the thing is, we don't want, God doesn't want the divine will be just his, now he wants it to be ours. So when we receive communion in the divine will, then he sees the soul receiving the greatest possible gift with the greatest possible gift. In other words, when I go to communion, I try to prepare, and I ask Jesus, since you're now in me with the fullness of the light of the divine will, I ask you to give more and more of that fullness to me as I receive you. that fullness of the divine will to me. Because I don't know where I am in the divine will. In fact, nobody probably knows where they're at. They'll probably never be told until they get to heaven. But it's not a question of thinking about where am I in the divine will. He don't want you to think like that. He just wants you to do what you read and enjoy what you read and love what you read and do the things that he does and so forth. But he doesn't want you worried about yourself, thinking where are you on the divine will, comparing yourself with anybody else. That's all foolishness. And so I don't know where I am. I don't have no idea where I am in the divine will. But I do feel confident that I am in the divine will, but I don't know where. I don't say I'm in it all the time. I do step out, but I've learned enough about this, and God didn't make this whole thing a big joke. It's real. It's real. If you believe that you get sanctifying grace with baptism, then you should believe that you're getting the divine will when you really want it and ask for it. All right. The soul floods the earth and invests all of creation so that all may receive the glory and joy of the marvels which the divine fiat operated in the act of the creature. There is no greater homage, love, and glory that the soul can give to us than to let us do whatever we want in her acts. So when we do an act of divine will, we should say, Jesus, here's an act of divine will. I'm giving back to you. You can do whatever you want with it. Nobody, you shouldn't have any. If you want to pray, use it to help convert some of your children that gone wayward. That's great, but Jesus uses it for whatever you want. If you knew our joy and happiness of seeing your littleness, this is Jesus speaking for the Trinity. If you knew our joy and happiness at seeing your littleness seated at our table, feeding itself on the truths of our supreme will, smiling in the face of its light, taking our joys to store our riches within yourself, adorning yourself with our beauty and repeating, I want the kingdom of your fiat. So Jesus, the whole Trinity just goes bananas when the soul does this. They just really, really love it. And only by reading these kind of things in a period of time with the grace of God, we understand why God wanted us. And of course, Adam screwed it all up. But now we got Louisa, who came into the world with original sin as our model. And of course, we're never expected to reach the things that she did or do the things that she did, all of them, because she and Jesus formed the kingdom for us. And we are allowed to go into that kingdom and live it. But they did all the hard work of forming it for the rest of us. One could say that each of these acts in the divine will is a new feast that is taken up throughout creation, and through the whole Heavenly Fatherland. My will is found everywhere, and these acts that flow in my will, like rays of light, carry new joys and new feasts and new happiness. These acts are the joys and the feasts and the happiness that the soul brings forth in the will of her Creator. And does it seem like a little thing to you that a soul can prepare and bring forth celebration, joy, and happiness to her Creator, and that our will could reign everywhere? These are just marvelous little extracts. By the way, something went through my mind a couple of times that might be interesting to hear. Do you know that all animals and all plants and all stones and all photons of light, everything that God gave us for our purposes that were of love for us, He says all these animals and plants and things, they do have a right. I don't believe in animal rights and all that stuff, but they do have a right, and here's the right. The right that they have is for us to be in them with the divine will, because if you're in the divine will, you're everywhere in the divine will. You can't help it. It's just the way it is. If you're in the divine will, you're in every animal and every plant with God. But the right that they have is for us to use our will and reason and voice. In other words, they can't will and reason and give love to God by their voice, whatever. They don't have a voice. I mean, you know what I mean. So they want us to provide them with a will, reason, and voice, and tell God how much they love Him. So the animals and plants and so forth, they have the right for us to be their reasoning, will, and voice. Will, reason, and voice. I'm going to try to read a couple more, and we'll see if we have some questions or anything. My daughter, how beautiful is my rest in the soul that my will animates. And through all that she does, she loves my will within her. You must know that as a soul breathes and throbs and works in heartbeat, throbs, works, thinks, loves, and acts, and everything else that unfolds within her, because my will is the center of the life of that soul. It is my will that breathes in her, throbs in her, beats in her heart, and gives motion to her work, circulation to her blood, and thought to her mind, and love to her heart, and everything else. Therefore, so that man may return to his place of honor, and enter once again to operate together with his Creator, they may amuse themselves together. There are no means other than his re-entering into our fiat, that is, the verbalization of God's will being given to us, that it may bring him to us triumphantly into our arms, which are waiting for him to clasp him tightly within our divine bosom and say to him, finally, after 6,000 years, you have come back. Each of the children of my will have within himself the source of all his Creator's blessings and of his eternal joy. Indeed, poverty, sadness, want, and all evils will be banished from the children of my will. It would not be fitting for my will, so immensely rich and happy, to have children who would lack something and who would not enjoy all the wealth of his overflowing blessings. We're talking about here spiritual wealth, but we'll have everything we need for our bodies and souls. So we'll never be, it's in a sense of poor like we know about today. We'll always have whatever we need, and we'll always never be hurting for anything. Talking about in the coming times, not necessarily right now. Now, there's a couple more. My daughter, my will is everything and contains everything. And it is the seed, the beginning, the means, the end, and the coronation of man, my gospel, and my church. I love that one. I just love that one to death. My will is everything and contains everything. It is the seed, the beginning, the means, the end, and the coronation of man, my gospel, and my church. That is why when I created man, I did not give him laws or institute sacraments. I only gave him my will because it was more than enough for him. And because he had his origin in it, he found every means he needed to reach not just an inferior sanctity, but the height of divine sanctity. So in the beginning, the divine will provided everything. And so then we did not need the sacraments, etc., because they are effects of the divine will. And if you have the source of the effects, you don't really need the effects. So in the Garden of Eden, they didn't need the sacraments because they had something even better. But in the new era, because Jesus says during the time from Christ until now, I wanted you to have the sacraments, and I said something about it earlier today, because you were weak little children trying to make your way through life. And I wanted you to have the help and he says the medicine and the remedies for your weak human will. So I give you the sacraments to give you sanctifying grace. And also with it comes a lot of actual graces. At that point, but in the future, in the resurrected church, he says we will continue to have the sacraments. But he says they'll take on another character there'll be continuous festivities in the happy kingdom of the divine will. My blessed daughter, Jesus said to Louisa, I made the creation and all the creatures to form my delights in them, to express from our supreme being the excesses of our love and the marvelous power of our works. If we delighted so much in creating so many different things in the order of creation, having to serve man, we delighted even more in making unheard of prodigies, works never before considered, and enrapturing beauties for the one who should serve us, that is, man, the primary act of our creation. So it wasn't the angels that God had in mind, it was us that he had in mind when he decided to bring other beings into existence. He had a place for the angels, he had a purpose for the angels, but we were the object of the creative act of God. We were the primary object. And that's incredible. When we're the ones that God shares our nature. He didn't share the nature of angels. Talking about, the angels, we know that there are 9 choirs of angels, and in each choir there's probably different levels in each choir. But the same thing he said will take place for the children of my divine will. There will be 9 choirs of children of the divine will. And in each choir there'll be different degrees in state of living in the divine will. So, yes, we can live in the divine will. And even if we don't advance higher than as some other people might, we can still be living in the divine will. So I ask God if I can at least be in the last guy and the lowest choir, at least get there before I end my life. And so I'll be content to be there. So we have all kinds of room to carry out our lives in the divine will. Okay, here's one. Oh, if you only knew what it means to be loved by all with an ever-growing love, and to have the power to love all with a newly growing love. If you only knew what it means to be able to say to your Creator, growing and ever new is your love for me. Your love is increasing and ever new is your love for me. Growing or increasing and ever new is my love for you. This love surpasses the heavens. It fills the heavenly fatherland, and its waves come to unload themselves into our divine bosom. I've got 2 or 3 more, and I'm going to pull away from it. The creative strength, this creative strength of the divine will unifies and fills souls and continues the creation in the interior of each one. So God's creation is not complete. He has to create in us another creation. Each one of us he has to create another creation in our souls, a spiritual creation, suns and stars and planets and so forth, a spiritual creation inside our souls. And that is in process, and when that's completed, then all will be complete. And what do we create? We create new heavens of love, new suns of knowledge, new seas or oceans of graces, and new air of sanctity, and new winds of refreshment that embalm the soul to a new ever-growing life of our divine will, new flowers of beauty, of holy desires, and so forth. What can we deny to our will? Nothing. In other words, if you live in the divine will and ask God, he said, I cannot deny you anything. On the contrary, we delight in bringing forth our most intimate joys, our secrets, our eternal beatitudes, so as to make the littlest of the soul in whom it reigns take delight. And as we make her the mistress of all of our secrets, he made Louisa the mistress of all the divine secrets. The most beautiful thing for us, the thing that enraptures us and glorifies the most, is the soul in whom our divine will reigns. Say that again. That's why Jesus said, when you pray like this. The most beautiful thing, the Our Father prayer. And that's the prayer that brings the kingdom. The most beautiful thing for us, the thing that enraptures us and glorifies us, the Trinity, the most, is the soul in whom our divine will reigns. That's pretty heavy stuff. That's some heavy stuff there, but my purpose, to give you a little insight into this, is to increase your understanding of why God made the human race. And He gets a great deal out of it. God gets a great, great deal. He talks about new joys and new happinesses for Himself that He gets from souls living in His will. And of course, He gives the happiness of being able to give as a God can give. You know, the human will has restricted us because we don't have the capacity to receive all these marvelous, incredible, joyful, and wonderful big benefits that God had in mind for man. Adam closed the door, so to speak. The human will doesn't have the capacity to receive all of this, and it's so weak and vacillating that it doesn't even pay attention to God. It doesn't even, you know, it's just a sorry situation to be in. But with this gift of the divine will, God can act like a God and give us everything He can possibly imagine beyond our belief, even to the point to making us, as we learned, well, I hadn't said it today, I think, but He said Himself that He wanted little gods that depended upon Him, of course. Adam and Eve wanted to be little gods without God. And that's how they screwed everything up. But if there is a question or two about this particular subject, give it a try. Anybody have any remarks or any kind of questions about this unbelievable gift of the divine will? I know some of you are here for the first time to hear about this. So don't let it go away, because that wasn't just an accident that you happened to be here. God had brought you here. God wants to give this gift billions and billions of times more than we want to receive.
I'm asking the question, you know, when we give our families to God if we're concerned about something and so on, and we say, Lord, now I hand my Johnny over to you and I ask you to take care of him because things are not okay, for example. I want to ask you if the equivalent in the will of God, for example, I am in the will, in the divine will, and in the divine will I give my Johnny to God.
Yeah, there's a big difference. There's a big difference.
I want you to explain that, if you would, for me, please.
Okay.
So, and I'm sure everybody else, would anybody else like that? Because we're always surrendering those we love, care about, neighbours, it could be our country, we're always surrendering them to God and asking God to bless and heal and save and so on. And what's the difference? You know what I'm asking. What's the difference when in the divine will I give that person, that group, to God for salvation, for healing, for deliverance, for whatever?
Yeah.
Will you tell us the difference when I sit down?
I'll try to talk to you about it. Yeah. You know, when we start off this talk today, we talk about how Jesus said, pray to our Father. And he's taught in the prayer. He's the one that formed the prayer. He's the one that taught it to us. But we know immediately that whatever He asked the Father, He's going to get. And when we ask in the divine will versus outside the divine will, we're asking God the Father with the same will that He has. So the power of that is immensely greater than being outside the divine will to ask the Father, or the Holy Trinity, for favor for our children to be saved, or to get out of a terrible mess they got into and get back in good order again. So the power of the divine will is far, far greater than the human will. That's just one thing. The other thing is, since you are I'm assuming you're in the divine will. I mean, I don't know, each person here is a different situation, and I hope we all will be in the divine will for long if we haven't already. But you're closer to the soul of your children than his soul is to his body. You are closer to your children than their own souls are to their own bodies. So you have immediate contact with them, and you should use the faith that you've learned, that you've gotten, to understand that this whole thing is ultra serious for the glory of God and for the good of men. That we use that power to be inside of them, closer than their own souls. Because Jesus says, my will is closer to the person than his own soul is closer. So his will is immediate to them, and immediate to their soul and their body and everything about them, past, present, and future. So with the same will that God is, he's letting us have that same will. We'll be united with him, and we'll be operating in that soul to move it by the grace that the divine will emits to correspond. You know, they talk about efficacious grace. Efficacious grace is a grace that always works, in spite of the human will. Many saints have the blessing of the efficacious grace. And so with this divine will, I think the possibilities of having an efficacious grace is much higher than outside the divine will. So efficacious grace means it always works. Or God gives a grace and he says it's going to work, and that's it. So, but that doesn't always happen, because he doesn't have to give us an efficacious grace. He has to give us sufficient grace. He has to do that in order to be a God, a Father. He has to give us the sufficient grace to do what we should do. But then, when he gives us an efficacious grace, no matter what our personality is or what our defects are, it's going to work. So we have this power at our disposal. On the other hand, here's what's happened with many people that I know that are Protestants. I know a lot of them. There's a lot of Protestants that I know personally, and I'm sure there's a whole lot more that I don't know. They have the real good will to come to the Catholic Church, in spite of all the weaknesses of the church today. And almost the next day or almost next week, they hear about the divine will. And God makes them hear about it. And then they get really excited about it. They become part of the prayer groups and so forth. And so but they were Protestant but became Catholic, and then they came to the divine will. I only know it personally. I only know of one person who's not in the church who I think is definitely very much in love with the divine will. And she's the wife of a Lutheran minister. And that's in Norway. Now, he's a lot older than she is. In fact, she's still alive. He's still alive. And the first time I met her was in Garabandal. And what happened to her was she had gone to Medjugorje, and there was a walking hermit or a traveling hermit guy who had a bag of books and stuff that he was carrying with him all the time. And she invited him to come up and visit them up in Norway. So when he got there, they had a little time together. Then when he was leaving, he said, "No, I'm going to carry all these books. Oh man, where are we at?" So he left some divine will books for her. And she started reading and just got really excited. Well, anyway, she went to Garabandal, and she was downtown near the church, and somebody mentioned something about St. Hannibal, and she pinned the person down and said, "Well, gosh, let me know more about what you know," because she knew what that name meant. And then I guess that led for her to come up to the House of Sanctification. We have a retreat house in Garabandal called the House of Sanctification. And so she came up to our house, and then we got to be really, really good friends. And she loves the Catholic Church. She'd married to a Protestant Lutheran minister, so there's a little problem there. But I'm sure that when he died, that she'd come in. Okay, I'll tell you one more story about that, because when I first learned about the divine will, I was trying my best to understand what God did in Louisa that he didn't do in the saints. In other words, I knew all the saints had learned the great secret. The great secret to be holy is do the will of God. The proper place, proper time, so forth. If you're a mother and you're home like it was in the 40s and 50s, if you're home waiting for your children to come home like it was back then, it's not time to go visit the Blessed Sacrament and say a novena. It's time to be home to do your duty and take care of your children coming home, make them feel happy and comfortable, and so there's nothing they have to worry about. And when we have people, everybody doing their duty, which comes before piety, duty is always before piety, always before piety. Except, on Sunday we have all of that, we go to church, of course. Then everything is in a stable order, stable order. If the father does his duty, the mother does her duty, and then everything in the family gets to be stabilized. I mean, I'm not saying it's always that perfect, of course, but without everybody doing their duty, there's no stability. Nobody can count on anything. So that's first, and then piety. So anyway, I said, what is the difference between what the saints did to become really super holy, it seems, and then what Louisa had? So I couldn't figure it out. I mean, I started talking about Louisa, started talking about that at the church in our little prayer meetings we got together on Thursday night, and I would say things, and I might have said some things that were wrong, but nobody else knew I was wrong. So, and then he chased me out. All right. So, anyway, finally on my birthday, I think I told the story to you before, but on my birthday in 1975, one of the priests who had sent me the first information about Louisa, he had to be traveling through Florida all the way to Mexico. And he stopped in my home for a few days. And he gave me a manuscript about what they had learned at that point. They didn't learn a great deal, but they learned enough. And about that thick, that 8.5 by 11 or A size A paper. And he wanted me to get it reproduced and give it out to people. So it was written in English. It was translated in English. So I was reading that manuscript. I'll never forget the moment that this happened. It was 11:25 p.m. on July 22nd, 1975. And I read about, and remember this is back when I just being introduced, But so I started reading about how Adam, and in one paragraph, and the page opened up, I started reading this paragraph. It said, as Adam and Eve were walking along in the Garden of Eden, and they were picking up flowers and smelling the fragrance and looking at their beauty and just enjoying themselves walking around, it said something incredible, which I didn't believe at first. He said, God the Father was watching them, and he was fascinated and enraptured and watching Adam and Eve walking along, having a good time, picking up flowers and stuff. And I said to myself, that is ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. That the supreme being of the universe, the whole, heaven and earth, would be fascinated and enraptured in watching two human beings walking along picking up flowers. And he told me, not with words that you could hear, but with thoughts. He put thoughts in my mind immediately, and he said, you're right, Tom, that is kind of ridiculous, isn't it? But that wasn't what was happening. I was watching my own will operating in those two people. And every time they took a step, I saw all kinds of incredible things come out of those steps. Marvels and marvels and marvels of the divine will coming out each one of their steps and picking up a flower. I was watching my own will operating in two other beings other than myself. And so when he put that in my mind, wow, I understand the difference between Louisa and the saints that have gone before. So they didn't possess the divine will, the people who come before Louisa. She's the first after Our Lady of Assumption. And so that was a prime moment when I got over the first hump of trying to figure out why are Louisa so different than the saints. And that was it. From then on, I just coasted. Didn't mean I didn't have some tests. Doesn't mean I didn't have some tests. In fact, everybody who's serious about living in the divine will get a test here and there. It may not be a big one, it may be a small one, but they'll get a test. I got 2 big ones. We got one real big one, one very big one. And I survived it. The first one, I survived by the skin of my teeth. But I don't want to go into what it was. But I made it through it, that test, and then it's easy, you know, it's a lot easier. And you don't have any more worries. God doesn't like us to worry. He doesn't like us to fret. And He doesn't like us to be scrupulous, because that's the worst thing you can be, is scrupulous. You don't have any freedom when you're scrupulous. You're always thinking about yourself. And so scrupulosity is an evil thing to have. And you must get rid of it if you haven't. So anyway, I just ran out of words. But I wanted to tell you that story because in case anyone here knew or still wondering, what is it that Louisa had that no one else had since Our Lady? That was it. God gave her and Adam and Eve the divine will for them to possess in common with the Holy Trinity. That's never happened except that Adam and Eve and Our Lady before Louisa. In most of the cases where there's a divine intervention that God wants to bring about a new devotion, for example. This is not a devotion, by the way. Bring about a new devotion like the Sacred Heart, so forth. He starts at the grassroots level, and then people watch the fruits of this grassroots level, like Sacred Heart. I think that was given to a nun, Margaret Mary, and so they watched it, observed it, and over a period of time, the church got involved to make a decision on it, and they decided it was from God. So it doesn't start at the top, it always starts at the bottom. As far as these new interventions of God to give new devotions and so forth. Now when it comes to divine will, it kind of went the same way, started at the very grassroots. Now what about back in the time of Mary, when the angel Gabriel appeared to her, she didn't run to the Pharisees and ask them if it was okay that she believed this angel. He just said, yeah. So God has the right to work any way He wants to work. He doesn't have to start at the top, and He doesn't. That's His pattern, is to start at the grassroots, let it develop to the point where the church moves in to check it all out, and if they think it's all from God, then they say, good, it's from God. So that's okay on that. As far as the roles of bishops and priests, well, right now we have some cardinals, we have some bishops, and we have a lot more priests than several years ago who are following the divine will. So it's just coming little by little. Somebody said today or last night, I forgot what it was, I never heard of Louisa. I said, well, you can't say that again.